So, Hachi was waiting for his owner at the train station. Who remembers what happened after the professor's usual train arrived? Pause here, talk about it. Chapter 5. The next morning, Yasuo and his mother arrived at the train station a little before 9 o'clock. The day was unusually warm and humid. It felt more like July than May. The air on the platform was heavy and still, and Mrs. Takahashi untucked a white silk fan decorated with pink flowers from her obi and waved it lightly in front of her face. "Where are the professor and Hachi?" Yasuo asked his mother. "I don't know," she said, searching the platform. Mrs. Takahashi's eyes swept over a sea of colorful kimonos in search of the professor's dark brown business suit. "Maybe the professor is away, or maybe he is ill." Mrs. Takahashi looked around once more. "I'm sure he'll be here tomorrow. Come, Yasuo. Here's the train." That afternoon, Professor Ueno was not on the train that Yasuo and his mother rode back from Shibuya Station. And he was not on the platform when they stepped off the train. But Hachi was there, sitting in his usual spot, alert and waiting. This is most unusual. Now I'm worried," said Yasuo's mother. "Let's wait for the next train." Mrs. Takahashi and Yasuo walked over to a wooden bench and sat down. It wasn't long before the next train pulled into the station and discharged its passengers. Yasuo and Mrs. Takahashi watched as a crowd of people hurried by. A woman carrying a furoshiki and leading a small child by the hand, high school boys in their navy blue school uniforms with gold buttons marching up the front of their jackets, and young girls with full serge skirts tied over the bright kimonos. Hachi sat there, where he was, sniffing the air, his eyes scanning the faces of the many people around him. Yasuo and his mother searched the crowd as well, but they did not see the professor. They sat on the bench while 2 more trains pulled into the station. Many people departed from the trains and hurried past Hachi to get out of the station, but Professor Ueno was not one of them. "Come, Yasuo," Mrs. Takahashi stood up. "Let us speak to the station master. Perhaps he knows something." Yasuo's mother bowed to Mr. Yoshikawa. "We are curious about Professor Ueno," she said. "He was not on the train today." "Oh, a terrible thing has happened." Mr. Yoshikawa removed his hat and spoke in a hushed voice. "Professor Ueno took ill while he was at the university yesterday. His heart stopped beating. Another professor who works with him came by my office and told me." Yasuo's mother knelt down and took her son's hand. "Yasuo, the professor has died," she said in a small, gentle voice. "But why?" Yasuo asked. "He's not old." "No one knows why it happened," said the station master. "We will never see the professor again," Yasuo whispered. And as he stood quietly beside his mother, his chin trembled and his eyes grew moist. He would miss seeing Professor Ueno every day. And what would become of Hachi? Yasuo turned to the dog waiting patiently on the platform amid a steady stream of commuters. Tears spilled down Yasuo's cheeks. "What about—" Yasuo's words caught in his throat. "I do not know what to do," said Mr. Yoshikawa, looking at the dog. "Hachi arrived just before 3 o'clock, as he always does. He does not know his master will never return." An idea took shape in Yasuo's mind. "Oka-san," he said, looking up at his mother, "may we take Hachi home with us, please?" "I am sure he will not be any trouble," the station master said. "He's very smart and well behaved. I have never heard him growl, and until yesterday I had never heard him bark." "I must think about it," said Mrs. Takahashi. She looked over at Hachi as he sat perfectly still among the mass of people swirling around him, and just at that moment he glanced over his shoulder and looked at her. Then his somber gaze returned to the train tracks. "Please, Oki-san," Yasuo said. "I will take good care of him, I promise." Yasuo held his breath as his mother thought. "I will do it for the professor," she said at last. "He was a very kind man." "Arigato, Yoki-san!" "Oki-san," Yasuo said with a bow, and then he went over to the doorway. "Here, Hachi!" he called, slapping his thighs. But the dog did not move. Yasuo ran onto the platform. "You're coming home with Oki-san and me," he told the Akita-kun. Hachi stared up at Yasuo, but the sound of an approaching train, he fixed his eyes upon the tracks. Yasuo stepped up right beside him and then began walking away. Hachi, heel! Yasuo spoke in the stern voice he had heard the professor use when giving the dog a command. Hachi, heel! He said again, but Hachi would not obey him. I will get you something to lead him with, said Mr. Yoshikawa. He disappeared into his office for a minute and then returned with a long piece of rope. He tied one end around Hachi's neck and handed the other end to Yasuo. Come, Hachi, Yasuo said. We're going home. He pulled at the rope, but Hachi would not budge. He is stronger than I am. Oka-san, you must help me. Yasuo and his mother tugged on the rope. Hachi stood his ground. The station master gave them a hand, and at last, with great reluctance, Hachi began to move. He is not happy, Yasuo said, as they led Hachi out of the station and down the steps. He will get used to us, Yasuo's mother said, as they half pulled, half dragged Hachi away. Were you surprised to learn that Professor Ueno died? Turn the movie off and talk about why or why not. All right. Here's your next question. What do you think is going to happen next? Okay, let's read. Chapter 6. When Yasuo and his mother got home, they took off their shoes and brought Hachi inside. Yasuo put a bowl of fresh water down on the floor in the front entryway for him. What will he eat? Yasuo asked his mother. He will eat what we eat, she answered. Rice and fish and vegetables. We do not have money to buy special food for him. Come inside, Hachi, Yasuo called, but the dog was not interested in leaving the genkan to explore the rest of Yasuo's house. He sat in front of the door and stared at it. He does not like it here, Yasuo said sadly. He needs time to get used to his new life, said Mrs. Takahashi. Yasuo knelt down next to Hachi and stroked the fur on his back. He spoke to him in a calm, soothing voice. I know you miss the professor, he said. At the word professor, Hachi's ears swiveled back. I miss him too. But you will like living with us, Hachi. I will give you bits of fish and meat and other good things to eat, and I will play with you, and we will have fun together. Yasuo offered his hand to Hachi, hoping he would lick it, but the dog just stayed where he was, staring at the door. Poor Hachi, Yasuo said. You are hoping that the door will open and the professor will walk through it. I would like that to happen too, but it's not possible. Yasuo shook his head sadly. If only he knew a way to make the Akita-ken understand his words. Yasuo spoke to the dog a little while longer, and then fell silent and sat quietly beside him, hoping his presence would bring the dog comfort. Yasuo, Mrs. Takahashi called to her son, it's time to start your homework. Yasuo brought his schoolbooks into the front entryway to be near Hachi. He opened a book and began to practice his reading. A short time later, he heard footsteps outside the front door. It was his father coming home from work. Utu-san, please do not come in yet, Yasuo called through the door. We have a surprise for you. And then he called to his mother, Oka-san, please come help me with Hachi. Yasuo's mother came to the genkan, and together she and Yasuo held on to Hachi so that he would not run away. You may come in now, Utu-san, Yasuo said, but please slide the door open quickly and then slide it shut tight behind you. Hello, who is this? Yasuo's father asked upon seeing the big golden brown dog. This is Hachi, Yasuo said. He is Professor Ueno's dog. And where is the professor? Asked Mr. Takahashi as he stepped out of his work shoes and into his cloth house slippers. Mrs. Takahashi motioned to her father to follow her into the next room. A few minutes later, Yasuo's father came back to speak to his son. Oh, I hear that Hachi is going to live with us, he said to Yasuo. I know that taking care of a dog is a big responsibility. Yes, Oto-san. Do you feel that you're ready to take on such a big responsibility? Yes, Oto-san, Yasuo said again. He is a young dog, said Mr. Takahashi, indicating the back of Hachi's head. He will live for many years, Yasuo. It will be your duty to take care of him for a long time, even on the days that you would prefer to do something else. I understand, Utu-san. Mr. Takahashi squatted down and patted the dog on the head. Hello, Hachi, he said softly, and then he turned to Yasuo. He is very beautiful. He's an Akita-ken, Yasuo said. I have heard of the Akita, said Yasuo's father. They are very brave and very smart. We will take him for a walk after we eat. Now, go inside and change out of your uniform, Yasuo, and I will put on a kimono, and then we will have our supper. When the evening meal was ready, Yasuo and his father went into the tatami room. They sat down on cushions in front of a low dining table next to a small alcove. In the alcove was a tall black lacquer vase holding a pair of purple irises that Yasuo's mother had taken great care to arrange in a pleasing manner. Mrs. Takahashi brought in 3 bowls of clear soup, 3 bowls of rice, and 3 plates of tempura, and then sat down with her family to eat. Yasuo used his chopsticks to pick out pieces of tofu and vegetables floating in his soup, and then lifted the lacquer bowl to his lips and drank the hot, clear broth. Next, he turned to the tempura. The pieces of batter-dipped fried shrimp and vegetables were balanced in a perfect circle on Yasuo's plate. He ate a few pieces along with some rice and tried to coax Hachi away from the door with what remained on his dish. "Here, Hachi," Yasuo said, offering the dog a few bits of shrimp. "Try some of this." But Hachi did not even turn his head to sniff at the food. He would not even take a sip of water. He just stayed where he was in front of the door with his back to Yasuo's family. "May we take Hachi for a walk now?" Yasuo asked as soon as his father put down his chopsticks. "Well, maybe that'll make him feel better." Mr. Takahashi took a last sip of tea and rose from his cushion. "We will feed him when we return. Come." Yasuo's father put one end of the rope around Hachi's neck and held the other end tightly as he slid open the door. But he was not prepared for Hachi's great strength. As soon as the door was open, Hachi burst out of the house, yanking the end of the rope right out of Mr. Takahashi's hand. "Hachi, come back!" Yasuo cried, but the dog raced away. Yasuo and his father dashed up the street, but they were no match for Hachi, who ran faster than the wind. Mr. Takahashi turned to his son. "I'm sorry, Yasuo." "It's not your fault, Utsu-san. Hachi did not want to live with us. We are not his family." Yasuo's father put his arm around his son's shoulders. Akitas are very intelligent. They were bred to be hunting dogs. I have heard that an Akita-ken can even bring down a bear. Do not worry, Yasuo. Hachi will take care of himself. "But what is there to hunt in Shibuya?" Yasuo asked. And his father did not have an answer. All right, that's where we're going to end today. But before I go... Oops, just kidding. That's not where we're going to end today. We're going to read the next chapter. Chapter 7! The morning after Hachi disappeared, Yasuo woke up early. He washed himself quickly, put on his school uniform, and hurried to the tatami room to speak to his mother. "Good morning, Oka-san," Yasuo said. "Did Hachi come back?" "No," Mrs. Takahashi said. "Utsu-san looked for him before he left for work, but he did not find him." "I'm sorry, Yasuo. Come sit down and eat something." Yasuo sat on his cushion, picked up his chopsticks, and tried to eat some rice, but he could not. He could not even take a sip of miso soup. There was no room for food in his stomach. It was too full with sadness. "We'll never see the professor again," Yasuo said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "And now we'll never see Hachi again." Yasuo stood up from his cushion and gathered his school books, moving slow as a turtle. As soon as he and his mother left the house, he began to search for the professor's dog. "Hachi! Hachi!" Yasuo called, cupping his hands around his mouth, and then he stood very still and listened. But he did not hear the footsteps of the Akita-ken. Yasuo took 2 more steps, stopped, and cupped his hands again. "Hachi!" Yasuo did this all the way to the train station, but it was no use. Hachi was nowhere to be found. The station master greeted them eagerly at the top of the stairs. "Good morning, Mrs. Takahashi." "Good morning, Yasuo," he said. "How is Hachi?" "He ran away," said Yasuo, looking down at his shoes. "We do not know where he is." "He's such a handsome dog. I'm sure someone will take him in and care for him," said Mr. Yoshikawa, trying to make Yasuo feel better. "I hope so," said Mrs. Takahashi. Yasuo had a hard time paying attention to his schoolwork that day. And he did not do well, even in math, his favorite subject. Usually Yasuo moved the beads of his abacus swiftly along their rods and called out the answers to addition problems long before his classmates did. But today he could not concentrate. All morning long Yasuo worried about Hachi. Was he hungry? Was he thirsty? Was he safe? He knew it was not his father's fault, but still he wished that somehow Utsu-san could have held onto Hachi's rope more tightly. But Yasuo knew Hachi would have run away eventually. The Akita would never rest until he found the professor. And as soon as Yasuo had that thought, an idea crossed his mind. Maybe, just maybe. Yasuo's mother met him when school let out, and they walked to the station. When they boarded the train to Shibuya, Yasuo pulled his mother through the train until they stood at the first car right in front of the door. "Why are you in such a hurry today?" Yasuo's mother asked. Yasuo did not answer. He wanted to keep his thoughts to himself, hoping if he did so, what he yearned for would be true. As soon as the train pulled into Shibuya Station and the door slid open, Yasuo leapt onto the platform. And just as he had hoped, there was the golden brown Akita-ken sitting in his usual spot, waiting for the professor. "Hachi!" Yasuo cried, throwing his arms around the dog's neck. Hachi wagged his tail once and allowed Yasuo to hug him, but he did not stray from his task of looking up at each passenger who stepped off the train, hoping to catch sight of his master's face. Mr. Yoshikawa hurried up to Yasuo and his mother. "I am so glad you are here to see for yourself that Hachi is all right. He arrived a little before 3 o'clock, just like always." "I knew he'd be here," said Yasuo. He stroked Hachi's neck. "He has not given up hope," said Mrs. Takahashi. She watched the dog's dark eyes search the face of every person on the platform. "He's very devoted." "Would you like to help me take care of him?" the station master asked Yasuo. "He will need food and water every day. He will need his thick coat brushed to keep it shiny and clean." The station master looked over at Hachi. "And he will need someone to keep him company." "I will come every day after school." Yasuo looked up at his mother. "Please, Oka-san." Mrs. Takahashi knelt down beside her son. "Yasuo, do you remember what Utu-san said about taking care of a dog?" Hachi! "Yes, Oka-san. He said it is a big responsibility and it would be my duty for a long time. Do you feel that you're ready to take on such a big responsibility?" "Yes, Oka-san." Yasuo's mother looked at her son. She looked at the station master. She looked at Hachi. Another train screeched into the station, discharged a horde of passengers, and left the platform. Mrs. Takahashi watched Hachi's head move to the left and the right as he made sure to look at the face of every person who came his way. "Yes," she said at last. "It is what the professor would have wanted. I know you will be good to Hachi, and he will come back to the train station every day because he knows you will care for him." "No, Oka-san," said Yasuo. "He will come back to the train station every day to wait for the professor." 3 o'clock. There's the Hachi. All right. This is really where we're going to pause for today. But before I go, I want to ask a question that you guys might want to talk about. I can't believe that Hachi came back to the station. He must be a super smart dog. What do you guys think? Will he keep coming back every day? Let's find out tomorrow.